Okay. So today, as Xavier mentioned, we are going to talk about leading complex programs. We're also going to talk about your life as a complex program. So we face complexity in the workplace. We also face it inside the home as well. Regardless of your life situation, regardless of your function or what you do, complexity is everywhere. And despite the huge promise on the slide about leading with expert laser guided precision in a world of chaos, you're not going to get that, because really at the end of the day, complex programs is really just how best to make things work and achieve the outcomes that your organization sets for itself. So in fact, I had a client in days of yore who did manage a lot of complex programs, and they got to the point where they adopted this phrase, good enough is. And that didn't mean that they were settling for anything. What it really meant was that they were trying to figure out, how do we get ourselves to the point where our work is consumable, where we get the objectives that we need to get done, and we do it in a way that is very efficient, predictable, transparent, with good quality. So you're going to hear these words throughout the presentation here today, but inside the complex program space, just know good enough is. So we're going to talk about a few things today. I'm going to start with a bit about me. It's not about me, but it is unfortunately about me because I'm the one talking. But I do want to credentialize myself a little bit. Leading complex programs has been a passion project of mine throughout my career. And I'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the Agile Thinker. Thank you, by the way, Xavier, for that plug. That's really nice. But talk a little bit about what got me to the point where I actually put pen to paper and thought through how to inject agile thinking and agility into someone's career and in someone's home. And in the case of what we all went through collectively over the past 2 years together, because they're now very tightly integrated. We're going to talk about chaos, and we're going to talk about opportunity that arises from it. We'll talk about what a complex program is. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't do that. Just so you can get some frame of references to what I was dealing with in my time in industry. And then you can apply that to your situations, wherever you are out and about. And then finally, injecting agility. So, all right, we got some jargon starting to fly around, some bumper stickers here and there, but agility is important, and understanding what that means in a work and in a home setting is going to be critical for you if you want to apply that to managing the complexity and chaos that life throws at you. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. I would ask, though, that if the questions are hard, you direct them to Xavier. So that's just the deal. She's the host. I'm kidding. But hopefully we'll have some time for some quick questions. Okay. So there is opportunity in chaos. This is actually the leading line of the book, but I think that this is something that has been, a defining factor of at least my professional career. And if you're in the project and program space out there in industry, you'll know what this means. But just to give you a bit of context on the statement, a fellow consultant back when I was consulting, again, days of yore, a consultant once said this to me while we were engaged in a very large, strategically significant transformational program. I happened to be leading it, and we ran into a snag. And the line that came out of this person's mouth is, there is opportunity in chaos. And what this person meant was, the implication was that the more chaos we could encounter in delivering the initiative, the more money the consulting firm could make by extending the problem. Now, I do not align with that. That does not hit my belief system, nor should it align and hit your belief system. So I was horrified, hopefully as the rest of you are. While I love opportunity, especially in a consulting environment, I'm not a super huge fan of creating opportunity at the expense of a client. So as it turns out, we rolled this person off. But it provided me with an opportunity, again, using that word, to reflect on what this statement really means to me as a leader, as a PMO person, as a transformationalist, as an agilist, as a husband, as a father. This one little statement has followed me probably for the past 15 years or so, and I'll explain why. But again, a bit about me. And, as I jump to this next slide, and as I saw the slides that Xavier led with, it's made me realize that I need a new picture. So this headshot's a bit outdated. Apologies for that. But again, I am Jack Walser. I just wrapped up a 6-year stint in industry as an executive director at Healthcare Service Corporation. If you're not familiar with HCSC, it's a large organization that licenses Blue Cross Blue Shield plans in 5 states: in Illinois, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Montana. Large company, all in all, about 47.3 billion in revenue, and just a little over 17 million members. So not the biggest group of blue plans in the world, but not far, and definitely has a seat at the table. And we did a lot of project and program delivery at HCSC for sure. At our peak in 2019, we were touching 900 million in deployed scope. We've reduced that a little bit over the past couple of years, which is just fine. But still, the PMO at HCSC is a large group of people led by some really talented folks. And actually, in full transparency, that's where I met Xavier. So here we are, full circle. I am an author. I wrote this book called The Agile Thinker. We're going to get into what that means here, and I'm not going to make this a commercial, but I kind of am, but I'm really not. I did earn the title of Most Important Person in 1979. I was given that title by my teacher, Mrs. Kuhn. I still have the title to this day. No one can take that from me. Most Important Person in 1979. It's going to stick. My motto is ever forward. It means a lot to me, ever forward. It also ties back to that there is opportunity in chaos. Ever forward, if you saw the movie Finding Nemo, Dory does the just keep swimming thing. She has that line, just keep swimming. Well, ever forward means kind of the same thing. As we go throughout our lives, as we encounter chaos and constraints and problems and obstacles, the best way to keep your teams aligned with you is to move ever forward. You can pivot, you can acquiesce, you can drive, but make sure you make forward progress at all times. And I'm being very general, but that does apply to just about everything that I live and I do. In fact, it is on my license plate. So if you live in the Chicago area and you were cut off by a car with ever forward on the license plate, that was me, and I am very sorry. 4 words to describe me in no particular order: I am an agilist, I am an author, I am a husband, I am a dad. And then everything on the right side is really my credo. This is what I believe. This is on my LinkedIn profile. You can see it there. In fact, I think I have some contact information at the end of the presentation to walk you through that. But if you find me on LinkedIn, you're going to see these words that jump right at you. So this is what I believe as a human. Here's the updated picture. I took this a week ago. So yeah, I have a new beard. Yes, the results are mixed, but I'm keeping it for now, at least anyway. I think, it kind of works. I will say though, if you're considering a beard and you think that it's going to save time with not having to shave, there are other items that you need to consider. There's like more work owning a beard than there was without one. So I just wanted to put that out there. I am a former naval officer. I am married to my college sweetheart, Heather. She's there in that tiny picture on the right. I am definitely out kicking my coverage. I do not deserve her. For those of you who know her, you will no doubt agree. We have 4 kids together, which represents about $1 million in potential college costs. So go buy a book, will you? No, I love my kids deeply. In fact, I've learned a lot from them, not just how to be, a dad, because anyone can be a father, but it takes something different to be a dad. But how to be a dad, I also learned how to be a leader and how to work with people and how to work with chaos and change just from the lessons that they taught me. So I'm going to be eternally grateful to those 4 little people who really aren't so small anymore. I am a dog person. I have a dog. He's there in the bottom right. His name is Cooper. He's a schnoodle. He is the world's worst schnoodle, so I'm not going to oversell him. But if you need a dog, you just let me know. I will ship him to your door. Believe me, you will get white glove service on that. I'm kidding. I mean, my family would never forgive me. And Cooper he's a good little dog. But that's enough about Jack. So what I want to do now is go from the personal to a little bit more of the credentials. So how did I get to the point where I was actually writing stuff down? How did I get to the point where I'm actually able to talk to you today about complex delivery and agility? So I'm going to take you back to 2008. This is when I bumped into Agile somewhat accidentally. When I encountered it, when I found out what it absolutely changed the way that I looked at my life, that I looked at my job, and ultimately the way that I co-parent my family. Just being honest with you. So back in 2008, it was relatively new as a discipline. I think it was about 7 years into its existence at the time. As I read about it and as I studied more and more about how it came about, I realized that it was less of a framework and more of a movement. So what does that mean? So at its core, Agile was a way by which a community of software developers changed the world. So a movement, they changed the world. The cohort, which was largely composed of software engineering professionals, were really tired of developing software using a dated technique that was really made for 1960s era defense projects. So what they wanted to do was not necessarily follow a linear plan, but they wanted to find a way to get their products to market or to their production environments faster. So their goal was, let's develop this way of working. Let's focus less on process and more on getting things done with real transparency, predictability, and quality, right? So, what a concept. There were few rules in the design. Instead, their approach was based on a manifesto, not the violent kind. This was a very non-violent kind, and it's short and sweet. And you can go to agilemanifesto.org to read exactly what they wrote, and it takes you about 5 minutes. But the manifesto was based on some really interesting and revolutionary concepts. Number one, it was focused on individuals and interactions. So let's get the people talking and let's get the people working together versus following processes and utilizing a tool set. So let's get people working together. Two, it really begins with the end in mind, right? It focuses on a product that works and not necessarily a bunch of exit criteria stemming from a bunch of obsolete documentation. And if you come from a background where you've developed business requirements documentation and then ultimately functional requirements documentation, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Or if you've worked with a large program or project that utilized the project planning package or PPP, you'll know what I'm talking about. This type of work for large initiatives is very time consuming. And at the end of the day, you are spending a lot of time, energy, blood, sweat, tears, and money trying to define a large product at the point where you know the least amount about it. So if this should stick with you, they wanted to make sure that we're going to get to the point where, we're focusing on what the customers actually want versus what we think the customers actually want. So there's a huge difference between the two. And then finally, it's asking its adopters to really collaborate and not negotiate based on what has to fit between project start and project deploy. It also allows people to pivot with change. I mean, we all know that change is a constant. So I say this a lot. I was on a podcast yesterday, in fact, but it's one of those constants like death and taxes. It's always going to be there. Change is going to be there. So if your organization or you as a person, human, are not able to pivot with that change, you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage just about every time. So anyway, this to me, Agile, it seems like a very human response to a lot of the tried and true practices that make up the core of delivery, of complex delivery. In this case, you're thinking about product development, but in the long run, it really focuses on let's find practical ways to develop as people and to get smarter, faster, and more efficient over time. So I was 100% in, and I decided to invest a lot of energy into finding out more. And it became I've used the phrase passion project of mine over time. I encountered my first Agile project in 2010. It was interesting. It was an Oracle implementation inside of a large mobile handset manufacturer here in the Chicago area. You can guess who that was. And then I conducted my first organizational transformation in 2012. And for me, that is when my obsession with complex delivery came about. Now, agile transformations, just like any transformational program, are complex. A company is not a static group of people that do a function, right? It becomes a living system that takes inputs and converts them to outputs. And there are so many components in that system that have to function together in order to get to that output stage. And when you're transforming a company, whether it's, an agile transformation or, insert transformative program here, you're going to start to see where the inefficiencies are with this group of people, where people need to work together more collaboratively, where the inefficiencies in delivery are, and you get to manipulate those along with your colleagues inside the company. And as you start to make small successes over time, people become energized by that. And so the light bulb goes on and the company realizes gains in efficiency and productivity if you're doing it correctly, but also the people become bonded with it as well. It's a wonderful feeling. Now, transformations obviously have the potential to go wrong, in which case it's like pouring concrete. It's very easy to get started, but once you got to back it out, it can become difficult. So I don't want to oversimplify transformations because they are difficult in nature. And change, as we all know, is hard to deal with. But I was lucky enough to get to the point where I did a transformation. I led a transformation for a Fortune 50 company. I learned a lot about people from my kids. I learned more about people from that exercise. I will say it was successful, but it absolutely consumed every fiber of my being while we did it. But on the back end of it, we were definitely smarter than we were when we started, which was a huge run. And then right before the pandemic is the first time that I elected to share the benefits with you, which comes out in this. All right. So this is not a plug for the book. This is, I want to let you know that I'm very serious about complex programs delivery, to the point where I've actually put pen to paper to try and find ways to make it easier for everyone. And I got here because as I started to do these organizational transformations, I've done 5 in my career, and that is enough. I'll say that, but I've done 5. And I started out with these large technology-driven organizations. I started getting asks from non-technology players. A building materials company wanted an agile transformation. Well, yeah, they developed code. They sent code to various stakeholders out in the market. But in the process of developing their code and sending it to production, they realized that they needed to find better ways of working together as a company. This was as much of a family repair exercise as it was a delivery efficiency exercise. So one of the most interesting transformations I did, just because they really had no business using Agile in the first place, but they all benefited from it. Second, a law firm reached out. Why does a law firm want to do Agile? It's because they had a group of people in a large practice area of theirs that had a caseload that was unsustainable. How do we put in Agile practices to help lawyers who should not have to spell software unless they're, an intellectual property? But how do we get to the point where these lawyers are able to make the work more consumable, to get it across their desks and out to their clients more quickly, and to keep the bill rates up? This is a better way of working together. And at that point, I realized, you know what? This isn't about turning products to market per se. This is about getting practical solutions to common work problems. But if we're addressing common work problems and we're starting to see the same types of patterns in our homes, there is an absolute tie-in for Agile being for everyone. Agile is for all of us. It is for everyone. We want to make sure that we're becoming more efficient. We want to make sure that we become more effective, that we get work done more quickly, that we work smarter, not harder, put whatever buzz phrase you want in there. But in the corporate sense, we were allowing these companies to move to a methodology that moved them. And in the process, we were creating opportunities for greater employee engagement. Why am I focused on this? Because in this market today, talent is very fluid. The market is unpredictable for talent, but keeping your employees inside of the four walls of your enterprise is a huge strategic enabler for a lot of companies. It's very important. It's expensive when a knowledgeable employee walks out the door because you're losing knowledge capital, right? It's very expensive to have to hire a new employee to backfill the old employee because that person is going to require probably more money and then a significant time to onboard, and that person probably won't be effective for 90 to 120 days in some cases. So it's an expensive problem for companies. So keeping people happy and closer to the work that they do is a huge strategic benefit. So it does have a special place in complex delivery, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Now that gets us to the point where we're talking about chaos and opportunity. So remember that line from my erstwhile consulting friend, there is opportunity in chaos. I truly believe that, because if you look at the events of the past several years, and I am very sorry for using the phrase new normal. It is cliche. I am tired of it. It makes me want to knock off a liquor store every time I hear it, but it is the new normal for all of us. If you think about the things that we have to solve during our daily basis, we have problems at home, we have stuff to do at home, we have problems at work, we have stuff to do there too. If you go back to pre-COVID days when we would wake up in the morning and we would get ourselves in order, and if we have a family, we would get them aligned and out the door. Maybe we'd get one or two things off of our home to-do list knocked off, and then we'd get in a car or a train or bike or however you got to work. You would have the ability to decompress a little bit before you attacked your to-do list at work. When we went to a distributed work environment due to the pandemic, and I will say as a people, we did very well with working remotely. So congratulate yourselves. I mean, I know it wasn't easy, but I think working remotely was a good exercise for us. And I'm curious to see where the future of work goes. But what happened was our personal to-do lists and our professional to-do lists collided roughly. I mean, they ran smack dab into one another. And so as a result, we had to make sense of what was important when. People worked longer hours when they were remote, but they were also getting stuff done at home too, which really implies that they weren't working a typical 9-to-5 schedule. So that requires a human to constantly reprioritize in their brains what's important now. And it really drove the need for more agile thinking inside of our professional lives, especially if we're driving complex engagements or if we're managing ourselves. I mean, you as a human being are a complex delivery opportunity. So if you look at going back to 2021, there was a lot of constraints placed upon people. There was a lack of personal interaction. I mean, it's great to, the commute inside of your house is awesome. You get out of bed, you roll over to a computer, you turn it on and you start your work. That's a beautiful thing. But that lack of collaboration and interaction with other people does take a toll, whether you know it or not. If you were negatively impacted by the pandemic, I am sorry to hear that, but and many people were. So there was a financial component as well, which caused complexity in lives. It also resulted in a loss of productivity for some, and then a difficulty in maintaining focus for others. Because again, when you're smashing two large to-do lists together, it's very hard for you to prioritize at any given time of the day what you should be focusing on. So how do we take all of this and really digest it within complex delivery space? Because it sounds like we knew what complexity was before. Now it's something a little different. How do we make heads or tails? And I'm gonna maybe pivot a little bit because we adapt to change here, right? We've all aligned on that. And I'm going to talk about the loose definition of complex programs. So quick disclaimer before I get into the next two slides. These slides are from a prior role. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, but I wanted to show you how complex programs were defined in that role so that you could get a frame of reference as to what I'm talking about. Now, in your worlds, you may have complex programs that are bigger. You may have complex programs that are smaller. In fact, some of the most high maintenance programs, in fact, Xavier and I worked on a few of these together. Some of the most high maintenance programs that we had weren't super large. They had small budgets, but they were deeply rooted in complexity, and it required a heck of a lot more of our own intellectual capital to solve than a lot of these larger initiatives. So loosely defined, again, on the right, in my world, corporate programs that typically had over $25 million per year in annual spend typically, and I'm using the air quotes here, you can see them, typically fell into this category. They required people to engage more heavily with executive sponsors. So there was an advanced stakeholder engagement need there. And we really needed to partner with the entire enterprise. So any project manager or any program manager knows that when you're driving a body of scope, you're touching scope, schedule, cost, quality, your fingers are in a lot of rice bowls out there, and you need to make sure that everyone is on balance and everyone is moving forward in the way that they're supposed to go. When you get into the 25 million plus range, the number of rice bowls, well, they start having force multipliers over and over, and it becomes difficult to manage. So what we did, and I won't spend too much time on this, but we had senior leaders run our complex program. So think senior director level people who had relationships with executive stakeholders that really understood the needs of IT and business leaders and were able to connect the dots. We also got ourselves to the point where we were involved earlier in intake and demand management. So in a traditional sense, at least in our world, IT would own intake and demand management, and they would go out and they would solicit the requirements. They would complete a lot of the forms, and then they would hand off this packet to our project managers and program managers to go run. Well, a lot of times, if the PM or program manager wasn't pulled in early enough, there was a ramp up period that person would have to do. They'd have to make heads or tails of what they were being handed and what they were now accountable to lead. And a lot of times that led to difficulties and a loss of productivity. So with these big things, we said, okay, let's make sure that we're partnering with our friends in IT and with the business earlier so that we understand the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. And we can explain that to our project managers, our program managers, and their product counterparts at the same time using one voice. Complex programs are typically aligned to outcomes, right? Every organization has an idea of what it wants to do in the out years. So when your senior leadership team says, we want to achieve the following 3 to 5 outcomes in the coming year, those 3 to 5 outcomes are typically, whether you use value streams or whatever, those outcomes are typically tied or should be tied to the work that you do every day, so that every requirement, every epic, every user story, every feature version, whatever, is tied to that outcome. And then finally, there needs to be a way for those leaders that run complex programs to collaborate. So there needs to be, we had a group, it was a center of excellence for all intents and purposes. We called it a dojo, but it was where the delivery leaders could talk about the problems they were experiencing. They could offer perspectives to others. And the goal was to walk out of the meeting smarter than you were coming in, and we never missed, which I'm very proud of that group. All right, more on this, and I'm not going to drain this one, but this is what the baseline requirements were when we started. So the total budget was anywhere from 10 to 500 million. Those are real numbers. It had to be super complex. We used an uncertainty model. I don't know if you all use uncertainty models. There are several great examples of them out there, but we use uncertainty models to classify a lot of our larger programs. If it touched 3 or more investment portfolios, or if it touched 4 or more product teams, and that's a very conservative number, then typically it would fall into this bucket. But what was interesting about this was that as we started to work through these big initiatives, it became less about us driving scope. It became less about us figuring out how to build these roadmaps and more about us taking a pause and saying, how do we inject, and I'm going to use the term hacks here, how do we inject agility hacks along the way to make ourselves more effective and to keep ourselves sane while we deliver these big things, because it can be very overwhelming for a team to walk into a large, complex program and expect to be accountable for its delivery. So we injected some business agility, some agile thinking, not necessarily tied to the book, although I will bring some examples out here. And it resulted in a framework that got us where we need to go. So business agility for the uninitiated. So I'm borrowing from a company called Agility Health here. If you are on here and you're with Agility Health, thank you. I hope you enjoy the plug. I really like this model, not just because it's colorful, because I like colors, but not just because it's colorful, but also because I think it very elegantly and eloquently talks about what business agility really needs to be and the benefits that you can drive from it. So in a business context, business agility is the ability of an organization to rapidly adapt to market and environmental changes. So if your customer base is demanding something that you don't currently have, or if your business or competitive environment puts you at a point where you're not at parity, then you might want to consider figuring out how to get there quickly. And you need to get there using a cost-effective and efficient way. So if you're adopting an agility mindset inside of complex delivery, you really need to think about the way in which your company is operating today. And so the benefits are clear. You can see on the model, there won't be a quiz on this, but this particular model looks at the customer's view, how we deliver internally, what our organization is willing to support. Do we have an agile culture and capability inside of our company to get better, faster, and stronger? Is it supported by our leadership? And how are we going to make this stick going forward? And the benefits are, again, these are broad. So I want to make sure that we're clear. Performing better in your marketplace, getting features out to your customers more quickly and with fewer defects, finding ways to get people to work together in a better way. All of this transitively is going to lead to greater customer satisfaction. So customer satisfaction ties to employee satisfaction, and also it ties to leadership satisfaction. So it's all linked together. I want to make sure that, as we start to reflect on what agility means, that we get to the point where we are focused on who our stakeholders really are and why agility inside of the complex delivery space really matters. I use a framework for it, and you're looking at it here. So this is outlined in the book today. There are 3 components to this agility framework that you can use inside of complex delivery if you so choose. Goals, enablers, and results. If you are the type of person that requires an acronym, I don't know, GER, so you do you, but goals, enablers, and results. So if you think about the way this formula is rolled out, or by the way, this framework I use to manage my family as well. So if it's good enough for us, it should be good enough anywhere, because believe me, we need the help. But this is the basis of how I view delivery in a complex area. So our work is driven by our goals, right? And the book, I talk about what goals really mean and how you organize your thoughts around them. So I have a story about finishing a basement, building a shed, even applying to college, right? I try to keep it very practical and something close to home for most. Making sure that we're able to take those to-do lists that we talked about before, and then make the items on them consumable, understandable, and at the point where you can organize them by value and priority so that you know what to work on first and now is huge. Second, the enablers. I have 6 here. You don't have to use 6. It actually reminds me of a Trivial Pursuit, old school Trivial Pursuit game piece. But our enablers are those things that we use to make us more effective. These enablers don't just pull from Agile, they pull from other continuous improvement disciplines as well. So I use things like Kanban and theory of constraints. If you're not familiar with Kanban, it's an inventory control system that's typically used in manufacturing, but you're going to start to see it creep into other industries as well. It was definitely in healthcare, and that law firm I was talking about before uses it daily. So it's actually the Japanese word for sign. So what Kanban really means is that we use visual cues to prompt the action needed to keep a process heading where it needs to go. Typically, when Kanban information is displayed, it's a bunch of stuff in 3 columns, usually with little sticky notes. But there's a column for all of the things that you know you have to do. There's a column for all of the things that you're currently doing, and there's a column for things that you've completed. So looking at how you organize your to-do list, you're going to see a lot of stuff in your to-do, because we all have a lot of stuff on our to-do lists. You have to be very careful with the amount of stuff that you can reasonably accomplish inside of your progress lists. And then hopefully, as you're starting to move and complete more things into the done column, you're going to get faster and better at doing so. So it's just a way of arranging complex information in something in a way that's easy for folks to understand. And the theory of constraints is, all right, let's figure out what's holding us back. Let's figure out precisely where it is. And that is way easier said than done. And then apply our investment, whether it's our time, our money, our focus, or all 3 to get it resolved. And then measure our productivity afterwards. So there are things you can use to drive that. But these particular enablers are just little kitschy things that I use throughout complex delivery, like understanding how quickly or how fast or how much work a team can do, trying to limit that work in progress, figuring out how best to display it. I use Kanban a lot, getting people to the point where they self-actualize around complex requirements, and then putting in metrics that matter, right? So we could have an entire webinar on metrics. I'm not going to go into that. My only prod to you would be to keep them simple, because metrics are there to either drive an action or force a decision. And we get into dashboards, we get into status reports. And if you're a PMO person like I am, you've seen all kinds of flavors of that. And a lot of times the information on there is either old, outdated, or just too darn much. And that puts a strain on our people. That's overhead that we need to reduce. And then finally, recording lessons learned. Every time you run into something good that you've done, something bad that you've done, or if it's just an outright failure, write it down. It's all valuable data. It's really important to understand that so that you can get faster. And then results, they are what they are. I mean, over time, we saw some success in complex delivery. We saw some challenges or opportunities, and then we flew the plane into the side of a mountain a few times. And all of that, again, is okay, because what that does is it makes the organization stronger. I've used this twice now in the presentation, but the goal is to come out smarter than you were coming in. Yeah, you want to get your objectives handled for the program, but when your people start to feel that, your teams start to resonate with that, then it's a really powerful force, and it helps keep them engaged, which is critical. Okay.
I'm sorry, Jack, before you move on, a quick
Yeah.
question for you. So can you share with us maybe a couple of metrics that you typically track?
Sure, absolutely. So we look obviously at cost. We were more of a product organization. So instead of looking at, your typical benefits for project delivery, we looked at our cost, we looked at value, we looked at employee engagement, and we looked at quality, right? These are all things that really made our product delivery less of let's manage a cost center and more of let's figure out how to make this more profitable. So those 4 items, and you can manipulate those metrics however you want. So cost and value will give you an idea on how profitable your particular area or program is. Employee engagement is important, because if you start to see more overhead on your people and you start to see greater dissatisfaction among your workforce, then you've got a problem somewhere. You can figure out where that constraint is for sure. And then quality, it is what it is. I mean, we want to see fewer defects, and we want to make sure that what we're handing to our customers out in the marketplace is something that they can consume adequately. So I hope that answers the question.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So a quick case study, and this is some more fun in industry, but we wanted to figure out, with a complex delivery scenario, how do we get to the point where the company can more rapidly adapt to our internal and our external stakeholders, right? The internal stakeholders are very important for the reasons I just talked about, employee engagement. The external stakeholders are obviously very important, because nothing happens till someone sells something. We need to keep them happy. Nothing happens till someone sells something, and then you should really understand what happens when there's no one around to coordinate delivery. So again, the hand graphic, very, very apropos here. But the bumper stickers that we presented to leadership, we want faster return on investment, which could mean admin cost reduction, reduction in OpEx, maybe an offset with member or customer growth. That certainly does help. Risk needs to be mitigated a little bit better. And then we want to make sure that we're getting stuff out the door more quickly. And then also, there are some things that if we do this in a standardized, repeatable way, we can get continuous improvement opportunities, delivery will accelerate. And then those three words, predictability, transparency, and quality, will be driven. And then the business problem around this was, all right, we had a bunch of silos, we had a bunch of teams that weren't necessarily talking or working together the way that they were supposed to. The requirements that we were putting out weren't the best. And that's really not because we lacked discipline. It's because we were new to putting our agile requirements together. We went from more traditional requirements to epics, user stories, and features, which, that's a leap. You have to get into a mode of becoming used to it and then figuring out how it applies best to your company, and also how it ties to those senior leadership objectives that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation. And then figuring out how to manage dependencies. A lot of times with movements into agility inside of an enterprise, the ask becomes, all right, well, we're going to move more towards a product-centric delivery model. So all these product teams are going to be accountable for delivery. But those product teams, if they're doing it correctly, they're focused on a product. They're focused on what their product does. They have Scrum teams that are focused on that Scrum team. Those enterprise dependencies are critical. So it's actually going to change the role of the project manager once you move into this sort of thing, but for the better. The drivers that we had drivers and outcomes. I'm not going to read these because I want to get to the next slide. It's kind of like the punchline to all of it. But we had to get better, faster, stronger. We had to figure out how to take complex delivery and break it up into chunks that people could actually understand. So what do I mean by that? We went from let's define everything that we think that we know about this large program to, all right, let's figure out what we're going to do for the first 10 weeks. And if we can't figure out what to do for the first 10 weeks or the next 10 weeks thereafter, then something's wrong. We're not planning effectively. We're not getting complete information from our partners. So let's break it up into smaller chunks that are consumable. And with that, the funding process, the management of the financials in theory should be, all right, we know how much the next 10 weeks is going to cost. So our variances from month to month should, in theory, go down. And I used to say low single-digit %. When you start out in a new methodology, you're going to see wild variations. But over time, our muscle memory is going to get better and more sharper with managing our money. So that's really the driver and the benefit as well. I will call out one item on the right, though. The organizational change management to manage the people side, excuse me, is critical because as you move to a new methodology, that represents a disruption in how you did before. A good friend this morning in a conversation said, what got you here won't get you there. And so a lot of people, when they decide to go along with the change, if they run into an obstacle or if they get into an area where they're not super comfortable, the tendency is to revert back to the old way, which leads to inefficiencies, which leads to disengagement, which leads to problems. So the ability to manage that change effectively and make sure that the people are okay with agility in complex delivery cannot be overlooked. So if you're considering a transformation, do not under any circumstances minimize that particular element.
Jack, was that change managed within the EPMO or outward?
It's everywhere. In fact, what we were talking about with complex delivery, and that's a great question, Xavier, but it's not just in the EPMO. It's definitely with the business. The business needs to be on board. IT, with agility, IT tends to run faster than everybody else. They get it. And so they tend to take off and move more quickly. The key is to figure out how to make sure your people understand how to keep up with them, or how to rein things back so that everybody's on the same sheet of music. But it touches all parts of an enterprise. And there will be a 300 question exam on this afterwards. So please study this in the next 15 seconds because I'm kidding. This is a framework. This is what I wanted to get towards. I'm not going to go through every single piece of this, and you're welcome. But this was a visual representation of how we had to change our thinking in order to get to complex delivery efficiency, right? So as I mentioned before, we broke up our work into 10-week increments. So these are our program increments. But we started our work, we led into that first 10-week period with a focused planning session. So in a previous life, we used, the cataclysmic gate 2, where you came with all of your requirements, you came with all of your estimates, and you asked for your budget release. And that would take quite a long time if you're dealing, I'm just going to be real, if you're dealing with large initiatives, that took anywhere from, it could take up to 120 days in the old way. So, I mean, that's a real number. So we wanted to make sure that we capped that at 35 days. That was planning. You're going to plan for the first 10 weeks of your delivery in 35 days. How do you do that? Well, there are things that we broke up inside of this inception period, and there is a blown up view of this framework, but the teams got to the point where they built muscle memory in the first 35 days to position themselves to be ready for delivery in the first program increment. And our theory was, and it tended to play out, if in 35 business days you're not able to plan your next 10 weeks of work, then there's a problem somewhere that needs to be addressed. You hit pause and you go back and you deal with it. But if you do have enough information, that first 10 weeks gets you to the point where you can focus more intently on a smaller batch of scope. You can deliver with certainty, which includes being able to manage not only how that's delivered, but also what you're doing with your financials. Because at the end of 10 weeks, you're going to have a specified product burn. You're going to have known EPMO costs with professional services, whatever your hardware, software, licensing, environment costs are. That's going to become more clear to you in a 10-week period than it is in a 52-week period. One interesting thing about this is while you're delivering in that first increment, you're planning for the next one. So we got to the point where we were iteratively planning and executing. So it was all simultaneous. Very, very interesting. What saved us? Well, going back, we put little hacks in place that, I've covered here to be able to go through that framework more effectively. Goals were established. We could do that in our planning period. Goals were also tracked during the iterative planning and execution phases that we had. We used enablers all over the place and just depended on the delivery environment and the product teams that were involved with us on what those were. These are general ones that I tend to favor, but you could put any sort of enabler that you want in there. And the results were mixed, but they were really trending towards positive. Some teams bonded with it, others struggled with it just due to the nature of their roles and their jobs. But at the end of the day, the entire enterprise in that complex delivery situation walked out of the year smarter than we were going in. And if there's one thing that I could wish on the lot of you out in ether, number one, it's health, happiness, and stability. So I guess it's more than one thing. But two, pull something from this and try it. Just try it. See if it makes your delivery environment better. And if it does, pull that string a little more and see what happens. And with that, I do want to say thank you very much. This has been a true pleasure. And again, Xavier, you and H. Hudson, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. If you want to reach out, here's my contact info. I am on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn along with the rest of the known universe. Please give me a holler. I would love to chat and collaborate with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jack. I know we have 3 minutes. I do have one more question, and I'm going to ask the audience. If you do have questions, just go ahead and send those my way. I will type my email address within the chat, and then if it's okay, if I can send those to you and we'll get those answered for you.
Of course.
But one of my questions is, okay, I know you guys use an agile framework. I assume that it was more of a scaled agile framework or a version of it. Yeah. Is that appropriate? And my other question is, what about those business components when it came to delivery? I know IT for sure used agile, but what about the business? Did they follow an agile framework as well for those business components?
Oh man, that's so first of all, yes, what we put in place was a version of scaled agile, and I wanted to kind of stay away from that term today. It's okay that you brought it up, but agile purists, by and large, some you'll hear some that are very vocal that say you should not scale agile like this. In our case, we had to. So it was a version of SAFe, but this particular case study, we had way too many product areas to do SAFe effectively. So this was a version of it. And then the business. So if you're thinking about doing a transformation, I would suggest two things. One, find the roles that are going to say no first to the organization. Typically, that's with finance, and it's also with legal and regulatory. So if you interact with a general counsel or a CFO, make sure those folks are on board first. And then the broader business community, they need to be brought in early so that when you do roll out this framework, they don't look at it and say, "What are you changing now? What am I expected to do? What's an epic?" You know, like. I don't understand these. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before. They have to be bought in because again, IT is very, you know, they're adaptable to this. The PMO will be a fast follower. Business you should start with because they'll take a little while longer.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Jack, for joining us. I mean, this information was very, very helpful. Really appreciate the time and effort you put into it. And for everyone on the call, the podcast, I'm sorry, the webinar will go out tomorrow. I will make sure I send that out. And again, we will also announce the winners of Jack's book. It will be a digital copy, so those will be announced tomorrow as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email address is xavierb@ehhudson.com. There you go. And thank you so much for joining, everyone. And we'll hopefully see you in January.